Hey, everybody. Welcome to today's conversation, the business case for sales coaching. I'm Mari with Ambition. Super excited to kick off the webinar today. Before I have our presenters introduce themselves, I know you can see them on screen here. I want to just quickly run through the agenda and a few housekeeping items to get the conversation kicked off. First off the agenda, over the next hour, Peter and Mark are going to share some very honest financial models and industry data that I know will really give you tons of insights for why sales coaching matters right now. They're going to discuss the elements of a successful programming, the resources and funding needed, and the ROI for sales coaching. At the end, they are going to take some questions, so please be submitting them along the way. I will be collecting them behind the scenes and back for Q&A at the end. That leads us to housekeeping. Everybody on the line is on mute. Again, please type all of your questions in the Q&A in the control panel. I will be watching that, collecting them, and we'll have a great conversation at the end. We are recording today, so please watch your inboxes for the video and additional resources in the coming 1 to 2 business days, and you'll have all of that at your fingertips. Next, I'm just going to kick it over to our presenters to introduce themselves. Mark, I'm going to have you start, and then I'll see y'all at the end.
Sure. Thank you, Mari. Hi, everybody. I'm Mark McWatters. I am the VP of Sales here at Ambition. Thank you so much for joining us. If you're watching the recording, thank you so much for watching the recording. I know I'm really excited to be here with Peter and talk about a topic very close to my heart in sales coaching. My sales career started as an appointment setter. This is before SDR was a title in the mobile home industry. So a really glorious first sales gig there. And ultimately went on to lead some sales teams at AT&T and here at Ambition. So sales coaching is something I've made mistakes on. It's something I've had some success in. I think I've seen not necessarily the gamut, but quite a bit. And what I'm excited about today is being here with Peter, who I really consider to be an expert in this topic and really talking about it from a third party verifiable data of why sales coaching is so important and also why there are real numbers supporting why you and others should invest in this. So excited to be here. Peter, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Mark. So hey, everybody, Peter Ostrow. I'm a research director for the sales enablement research that we do here at Forrester. So Mark, hearing about your mobile home appointment setting threads, if I think about the first thing that I sold after college as a professional, it would have been something that most of our audience probably can't relate to at this point. It would have been help wanted advertising in the Sunday newspaper. Okay, and I try to ask our younger friends, like, hey, how did you look for a job before the internet? Well, that's actually how it was done. So a long sales career, just like you, Mark, and then kind of came over to the dark side some time ago. And now as an analyst, we just help people with sales, specifically sales enablement in my space. I live about an hour outside of Boston. So tonight's the night for the Red Sox to begin the ALDS against the Rays. Sorry, Yankees fans out there.
Not sorry,
but
not sorry.
Hopefully we'll have a lot of good content about the coaching today.
Great. So let's talk a little bit about how you invest in your sales reps and why that matters. I mean, what really comes to mind for me first is the current market that we are in. I talk to a lot of sales leaders, and retention is more the topic than ever when you talk to people about their priorities. Coming out of a business planning session for our leadership team here at Ambition, we're talking about how do we keep our great people and how do we go find more great people to join our team. And one of the core pieces to employee retention that people don't think about a lot is how they are coached and developed. If you look at industry data and look at top reasons for leaving, career development is typically very high on that list. So I start with retention because I know how critical sales coaching in general is to retaining great employees. And then there's the obvious, right? Helping to develop in their specific role, in their specific career, in their specific sales tactic, and how they ask questions. There's so many reasons why coaching is critical. And what I'm most excited about today is we're going to get into a lot of the numbers. I think coaching in general, we do it because we know it's the right thing to do. But if your CFO pressed you on the ROI of coaching, you might backpedal a little bit, right? And so one of the outcomes that I hope you walk away with today is how to quantify that better, how to really put together a business case and what that looks like and what you can recommend going forward.
Yeah, Mark, I like that reference to the CFO. We often talk about sales enablement as a space where the end results of what we do are not really things that are causally or even in most cases corollary relations with the things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And we actually often bring up, I make up the acronym WWTCFOS. What would the CFO say in order to say, yes, you've done a great job at this particular initiative in your sales enablement. You've done a great job with your coaching or with your hiring or whatnot. I mean, you bring in retention, the adjunct of the retention problem is the great resignation. And everybody's got this pent-up demand coming out of this pandemic, being more willing to make changes and life changes than they were for a while. And it's really, really difficult for sales organizations to accommodate that because the planning doesn't really generally account for the ups and downs, or really in most cases, as you'll see shortly, for any kind of retention as a normal way of doing things. So before we get into the data, Mark, this is the thing that we were looking at when we were talking about the content for today. This is kind of a theoretical approach before we get into our hard and fast analyst numbers. If you guys just want to think conceptually about these two variables, on the y-axis you have money, and on the x-axis you have time. So let's think about a single individual, a person who is a salesperson on your organization. It could be a BDR, it could be a territory rep, a field rep, an overlay, a new business, a hunter farmer, whatever the role is. Think about what happens when that person has left your organization and you need to replace them with another person. So for a period of time until you've hired that new person, for a brief period of time, that territory is actually kind of profitable for your organization. You're not paying out the salary, but until the lack of selling or maintenance catches up, you're still getting the inbound revenue from that patch. That's very nice, but for a very brief period of time. At a certain point, you obviously are going to have to hire someone to fill that role. And that's where the economics become a little bit more negative and certainly below this zero line. So when you hire someone and they start to get their salary and their benefits and other costs that you have to provide to them, they're in learning mode at first. Now, how long should onboarding be? We've got plenty of other discussions we can have about what good looks like in terms of onboarding length and breadth and quality and quantity. But the net is, excuse me, until a certain point in time, that person is kind of in a mode where they're sucking the company's resources up and they're not giving back, whether it's a week, whether it's a quarter, whether it's a year. At a certain point, that person will be trained, they'll be selling, they'll be maintaining, whatever their roles are, and they will be a break-even value proposition for your company. So when I do my final click, we just watch this line grow and grow and grow and grow over time. The gap between that solid black line as it extends infinitely through time and that baseline of zero is where the need to maximize the lifetime value of your sales folks or anybody who you're enabling, excuse me, anybody who touches the customer for that matter. That's the goal for enablement and sales leaders in general. How can we get the most out of the folks who we have spent the time and dollars to hire, to train, to onboard? And one of the key secrets is by putting more into them, which is really the theme mark for today's discussion on best practices in sales coaching. So we think of 4 different variables when we talk to our customers about this revenue contribution, this lifetime contribution of a rep. First of all, we want to make sure we can try to control the timed competency. How long does it take for someone to get from the first gate of competency requirements? Here's what we had to have from you, tested, confirmed competencies to get hired, to that second gate, which is when we allow you to go into the field. That's obviously the onboarding and the orientation window. Most companies are under a lot of self-induced pressure to reduce that time. And I've been there as a sales manager. I mean, Mark, you get a new hire and you're like, oh, there's a real tendency to be like, just show them around and I'll teach them everything they need to know while they're in the territory. They got a number to hit. But there's the quality and quantity conundrum there. So we want to make sure that time to competency is at least addressed for new hires, but also when you're teaching new competencies, new skills, new knowledge, new product offerings, new motions to your tenured hires. Then we want to make sure they're not just doing it fast, but they're doing it well. So the cost of a bad sales hire is a topic that we can all think about, talk about, do research on. That's why we focus on making sure that each 3 stages of the sales talent lifecycle, hiring, onboarding, and then optimizing that long-term contribution of a seller are dictated by the strict adherence to this competency. Which competencies do we buy that are must-haves? Which ones do we build in onboarding? And then which ones do we grow and promote over time? The third variable is how easy is it for these folks to do their jobs? We've done some stage work this year, virtual stage work this year, on the idea of how many possible products should a B2B seller represent? Is there a time when you give them so many motions and so many SKUs that you're actually making it harder for them to sell? And we talk about this through the lens of everyone sells everything until they can. So that's another variable that we have to think about when we think about the lifetime contribution of a seller. Someone's been on board for 8 years. Are we asking them to be an expert on so many different offerings that we're drowning them in minutia and not letting them focus on what works? And then finally, this variable of how long are they working with our organizations and for our organizations? Maybe not always just in a sales role, but maybe in other roles over time. But are they contributing to our bottom line in revenue-centric or revenue-adjacent types of roles? The longer or good or great seller is with us, the more money they're going to make for us, and the more money they're going to make for themselves. So as we start to think about this coaching construct, it begins with this kind of conceptual analysis on this slide. But wait, there's more, right, Mark? We have the hard and fast data that we talked about to back this up. So in our research here at Forrester, we look at, for instance, high growth organizations, companies that record at least a 30% on the plus side of revenue growth on a year-to-year basis. These companies are dramatically more likely than low growth companies to make sure that every single launch, a new offering, a new product, a new message, is formally encapsulated by the sales enablement team so that we can make sure folks learn it. Now, the downside of making sure that every new product and launch is provided through formal training is, what if we're an agile development organization and we have 26 new products a year? Every other week, we do some little tweaks. Well, there's a limit to how much education and training you can and should provide to the reps. But when it comes to the coaching as to what the new shiny object is all about, the formal training and development needs to be available for your first line managers and overlays and field coaches so that they can then coach their charges and their affiliates and their reps and channel partners accordingly. The next data point is that these high growth organizations are much more likely to identify this first line manager role as the most important change agent in introducing new competencies, new products, new offerings. I'm a first line manager. There's individual contributors who report to me. I'm kind of in that low to middle range here at Forrester, where there are times when I feel there's some stuff up above that I need to support, some stuff down below that I maybe also need to support. And it's a crucial role to making sure that that individual contributor in a sales environment has that feeling that I have their back. So high growth companies are much more likely to provide some of the tools for, let's say, coaching, using video-based coaching for practice and using peer reviews and best of breed demos and things like that. We have this cadence that we talk about, Mark, for continuous learning, and we talk about tell, show, do, reinforce, and own. For any new competency, tell me what I need to know, show me what good looks like, let me do it over and over again until I get it right. And those second and third phases is where these tools really come into play. And then finally, our data point is that high growth organizations are 40% more likely than the low growth organization to make sure that they're looking at the effectiveness and the progress of their first line managers' coaching capabilities, not just through those lagging indicators of, did the number get made? Did we grow our average deal size? Did we have the right product mix? Did we shrink the sales cycle? Those are important. Those are, what would the CFO say, metrics. But in the end, coaching has to be attributed to some of the leading and learning indicators. And we'll talk about some of those as we move on through the content today.
Yeah, I just love the focus on the frontline manager. I'm sure we have several of them here joining us right now, and like we see you, as a VP of sales or as a CRO or as a frontline seller. You have companies that are like, okay, let's invest in the top because like we need to activate the top as much as possible. Or how do we touch the front line? How do we get them trained and enabled? The frontline manager is the crux to the success of a fast growing team. And so you showing some of those stats, I think about how many frontline managers are forgotten about, who are like, maybe they were a great rep and they get brought in and they're expected to do that for all their sellers. And they need to be coached and enabled and focused on. And so I feel like a student watching you talk through those numbers, but let's talk about the value, right? So you see here that we think about consistency and scalability at a VP, a C-suite level around your sales coaches and your frontline. And what we at Ambition and Peter, what a lot of us think about is, how do we activate the frontline manager? How do we create a better coach, a more efficient coach that can not only drive KPIs, hockey stick them in the right direction, but also how can they efficiently manage the right size team? And so what we've seen is that when sales coaching is done right, and we're going to get into that, you see a 5 to 25% lift in KPIs. I don't know anyone who's not trying to sign up for a 25% KPI lift, but also those frontline managers have the ability now to manage 1 to 3 more reps. Now, that comment, sometimes people are like, yo, I don't want 1 to 3 more reps. Well, the same concept applies to the time savings of now having that time. So maybe you have the time to manage 1 to 3 more reps, but you put that time back in your existing team. And so we all know frontline managers are asked to do a ton, like Peter said, and I liked how he looked up and then looked down, like you feel it coming from both sides, but you're often stretched really thin in terms of, right now, a lot of frontline managers have too much reporting, or they have too many one-on-ones, and prepping for a one-on-one takes way too much time. Well, how do we make that easier on a frontline manager to make them more prepared and more ready to actually drive behaviors in those coaching conversations? So a couple stats here that we're going to walk through, or a few, is that you're going to see a 5% year over year lift, according to Ambition data. An investment in sales coaching has a top line impact that increases revenue metrics by an average of 5%. Okay. And key sales activities on an average of 25%. So when we think about the top line activities, maybe it's calls, emails, appointments set, appointments held, a 25% year over year lift with an investment in sales coaching. And then when we think about the bottom line, a 5% year over year growth can be pretty substantial when you think about your own team and what that could do for your numbers. Our next one here is 8 hours. Okay, frontline managers, I'm talking to you. I know how demanding it is to prepare for too many one-on-ones. I have been there. I have sang that song. I'm in Nashville, so if you hear the draw coming out there, that's why. And when we think about investment in sales coaching, think about saving managers time, especially prep time around a one-on-one conversation. So when we look at this impact of sales coaching, sales managers are saving an average of 8 hours of prep time per week. The average leader is leading 7 to 8 people. So if you think about an hour per person in prep time per week, frontline managers are like, yes, give me an extra hour per person on my team. Let's hit the next one here. Okay, so a 2% lift year over year in employee retention. Peter said it, the Great Resignation. It is getting beat down in the press and in leadership roles of how do you retain great people. It is easier than ever for those folks to find a new, interesting, exciting job. Well, one way is that you invest in sales coaching programs, and a lift in 2% retention for some of you out there at bigger companies is a massive lift in how you keep your people, like Peter talked about earlier, where they produce more ROI later on as they're fully ramped producing reps. And now we're going to kick it over to Peter to talk through these financial considerations.
Thanks, Mark. So we're going to do a bit of an analysis here that is going to kind of look familiar to you, but we're going to take a little bit of a different spin on it. All of us are bombarded all day long with value actualization tools and ROI calculators. I consider most of these to be sort of hokum, to put it politely. So we wanted to make sure that when we talked about coaching and its value and measuring the impact of doing it well or not, we try to be super realistic with our numbers. So what we're going to do here is think about a year in the life of a BDR department. Let's say you've got 20 reps, and these guys are, very conservatively on the hook for driving $360K each per year. So you've got a $7.2 million business. Think of it as a BDR floor, an SDR floor, an appointment center floor back in the day, Mark. And so think about that as the business that let's say a particular sales leader or pipeline manager is responsible for. Let's talk about the personnel coming and going, which was essentially the argument that we made up front, which is the longer you can keep a well-hired, well-trained, high-performing B2B salesperson on board, the better. So let's take a little bit of a look at the calendar here and think, again, very conservatively, about 15% turnover. That's probably half of what turnover is in most organizations. We see 12 to 15% voluntary plus 12 to 15% involuntary in most organizations, but we want to be super conservative with the numbers. So let's say that you lose 3 people over the course of a year of this $7.2 million business, and these resignations happen in February, they happen in March, they happen in July. And so the productivity you're going to get when those folks leave is this text that's here in the orange. But wait, we have good HR partners, we have recruiters, so they're going to backfill these positions. But it takes a little while, right? 2, 3, 4 months, it depends on things. The supply chain for talent is difficult right now, just as it is for just about everything else. So let's say we backfill these folks and then we ramp them up and they start producing, the February departure starts producing in June, magically at full capacity of 360 per year prorated. And then the March and July and the July and October. So the net loss of a very conservative turnover number is $330,000 per year. Well, it's about 4 or 5% of your business total. It's nothing to sneeze at, but it's not necessarily horrible. But there's the expense side of turnover. So let's think now about what it costs actually to replace these people. They don't just happen. We all know how hard it is pre, during, and post-pandemic to find the right type of sales talent. So there's a lot of hard costs that are baked in to locating, certifying, checking, training, developing. Maybe the T&E is a little bit lower right now, of course, right? Onboarding, but these costs do add up. Maybe they come out of not the sales budget. Okay, maybe they come out of the human capital management budget. That's fine, but they're the company budget. At the end of the day, there's some hard costs, and if we add those hard costs up to the uncovered territory costs, again, very conservatively, what we saw in the last one, that all adds up to $418,000. Again, assuming a very, very, very modest turnover rate, assuming a very, very fast rep replacement rate. Let's take this thing one step further. Let's cut that number in half, okay? So what if you're only losing $200,000 a year? That's still more than half a rep. So if you're thinking about your business in terms of the number of reps and the number I'm supposed to achieve, and you have a one-to-one relationship between the reps and their quotas and the big number, those plans are sunk before you even begin your year, before you begin your quarter. So Mark, our thinking here is all about taking the most conservative possible way of thinking about this best case and worst case scenarios. Folks need to understand or think, is there a way to mitigate that loss of talent? And obviously what we're talking about today is the context is going to be coaching.
Yeah, and I mean, what I get excited about with those numbers is now I'm a sales leader. It's easy to get me excited. I have friends in finance. You share those numbers that Peter just referenced regarding these lost costs around retention. Those are so real. I mean, even like he said, cut them in half, and the CFO is going to nod and say, "Yeah, those are pretty conservative." Especially if you're in a fast-growing company, or this could be a big company too, where you're hiring recruiters external that are helping to fill the roles. Those people are really important, but they're not cheap either. So when that doesn't work out, those costs just continue to stack. So when the first time Peter showed me that, I said, man, I've lived this on the other side. It's more than that. So anyway, let's talk about the investment. 8 months is what G2 Crowd talks about for when you invest in a sales coaching program like Ambition, recouping that investment. When you think about reducing retention, increasing performance, quicker onboarding, you see that ROI in only 8 months. So this is something that makes it even easier for the CFO to stomach an investment around coaching.
All right, so Mark, what we'd like to do now, and by the way, folks, keep those questions coming. We see them coming in on the panel there, and we'll deal with all of that enjoyably towards the end of our content presentation. So if coaching is one of the ways in which we can mitigate the cost of sales employee turnover, mitigate the damage done to our ability to hit the big numbers because we're paying more attention to the little numbers, what does it look like? And what we'd like to introduce now is sort of this concept of 4 important key components or mainstays of great sales coaching. We have lots and lots of additional data behind the scenes that back up why this is so important, but we wanted to paint a financial picture today that was, again, kind of very CFO oriented. Yes, we know that high performing sales organizations provide more training and development and coaching than low performing organizations. Yes, we know that high performing sales people expect their sales employers to provide them with more learning and development opportunities than low performing sellers. And those learning and development opportunities are not limited to just the products I'm selling and the personas I'm selling to. It's professional development. The good news is a lot of companies are starting to respond to this. And there's a lot of sort of cultural emphasis these days on the whole employee. The pandemic has certainly driven awareness of how important TEI initiatives are, work-life balance. You see more and more companies shutting down for a week just to give our brains a break. For a long time, though, Mark, I feel like sales organizations were considered immune from these challenges of holistic, sort of corporate HR practices, because salespeople are this special breed, right? Just give them their quota and their comp and their territory and their script, and they'll make or break it on their own. Well, I don't think so. Mark, I'd like to speak for you when I say the following. Just because we're salespeople doesn't mean we don't have feelings.
Right? That's right. That's right. We're still people, right?
We're still people. Usually, except for the end of the quarter. Then
crazy
just
people,
machines, right?
That's right.
But the whole point is the holistic management of a salesperson means that there is a person inside there. So organizations are recognizing that what they need to do as table stakes for their salespeople is starting to more and more mimic what they need to do for their employee base in general, but more so. Forrester has some great future of work research where we discovered that salespeople are more likely than all other roles on average throughout the pandemic to say they're burnt out, they're feeling unproductive, their wellness is suffering. So coaching is one of the ways in which, while we tend to focus on coaching for skills and competencies, coaching is also a leadership function. And let's remember that anyone can be a leader. Doesn't matter whether anybody reports to you or not. A leader is someone who is followed by other people. And I don't mean on Snapface and Instacart, right? It's about being followed as a person. So we've got these 4 mainstays of sales coaching that we're going to talk briefly about: culture, insights, actions, and then the process and toolkits. Let's start with culture, which is what I was beginning to talk about. First of all, let's remind ourselves that even though we're salespeople and sales managers and sales leaders, we were given 2 of these and only 1 of these. And sometimes coaching is not just about dropping in like a seagull syndrome. You know what that reference is all about. And closing the deal for someone, right? Give the person the fish, no, teach them how to fish. And that means that sometimes coaching is not just telling somebody, but it's actually listening. And it's learning, because we need to be better at our jobs over time. And the only way we're going to be a better teacher is if we let ourselves be educated by our virtual students, as it were. The other thing is that coaching is too often applied just at sort of the beginning of the sales cycle. Here's how you make a lot of calls. And at the end of the sales cycle, which is show me your deals. Coaching needs to be omnipresent throughout that entire cycle, because guess what? The customer's journey, which is the only thing that should matter to any of us, doesn't recognize stages. The customer doesn't say, oh, I'm in stage 1A in your CRM. or I am now at commit. Customer just wants their stuff quickly at the best possible price with the least amount of friction. So the coaching that takes place between the first line manager and their direct report, or between your field sales coaches, your uncles and your aunts, or your overlays, or your managers, or anybody who's a leader in the organization, it needs to apply equally throughout the cycle of a deal, which means that it's in some sense an always on offering from leadership. And then finally, we need to make sure that we recognize if and how we want to tie someone's compensation, someone's career development, someone's membership in our organization 100% with how many products they sell, or 99.5% how many products they sell, but 0.5% who they are as a member of our community. Mark, I have more and more customers who are telling us that during sales onboarding, when the first line managers are desperate for that new rep to get into their undercovered or uncovered territory, the company has a policy. All new employees, including salespeople, will spend at least one day on community service, on volunteering during those first 2 weeks, even if they've got a number on their heads already. That sends the kind of cultural message that who we are as a company reflects who our customers are. And our customers are inevitably going to be thinking more about diversity, equity, and inclusion. They're going to be thinking about work-life balance. They're going to be thinking about social justice. They're going to be thinking about sustainability. And if we ignore what our customer base in most of our industries is thinking about, and we don't apply that to our own staff, including the sellers, then we're making a big mistake. And we're actually going to conduct a bunch of research this winter to further validate the points that we already have in hand about this. The net is, should I be rewarded only for what I do, or should I be rewarded for what I do as well as who I am as a member of the community? So these are the cultural components of coaching that we think are super important.
Yeah, this is, I mean, if there's one good thing that came out of this pandemic, it is so many companies are now taking the individual more seriously. And I love the onboarding example, because especially when you're a fast growing company, you just need people that are qualified in seat. You need them to go. Well, sometimes slowing down helps you speed up. And I think I heard this phrase the other day that I really liked, and that slow is smooth and smooth is fast. And so when you can slow down, and in onboarding, by the way, no one's more engaged in the first day they walk into your building or show up on your Zoom box or whatever the analogy would be now. So being able to invest in them at that time in the right way is critical. The other thing I want to layer in here is this idea of combining accountability and encouragement. I think if for the folks that are joining us, like, think about the best coach, the best teacher, the best mentor you've ever had. I'm willing to bet that person held you accountable and cheered you on like crazy. And why am I willing to bet that? Because yes, they helped you succeed, but they were your biggest cheerleader along the way. And so for those frontline coaches out there, I love talking about combine the two. Hold your folks accountable. They actually want to be held accountable, but they need to know you're in their corner. You need to be the biggest fan, the first call when something closes, the public recognition that you can send. When you do both, it's extremely powerful. Whereas if you just do one, hey, Mark always held me accountable, but man, I was miserable. The culture was awful. Or, hey, Mark always cheered me on, but we lost all the time. Kind of like the novelty of his cheers didn't make sense. Let's bring the two together. That's how you
Mark, are you there?
Mari, I can hear you.
Peter, why don't you just go forward with your next few slides?
No worries. I know you can
Thank
communicate
you.
with Mark offline.
Definitely.
All right. So culture, piece number one of the mainstays of the great coaching program. Next, we're going to talk about insights. We've got a lot of IP these days here at Forrester about the insights-driven sales system, and for good reason. We all have lots of data, but there's probably too much to know exactly what to do with it. So here's a couple of hints. First of all, when it comes to coaching, we want to make sure that there is a regular cadence of observation. Yes, we can hover over someone's shoulder. Yes, we can use tools to listen or capture data from the calls that they make. But just like the way we talked about the cultural piece, we want to make sure that observation takes place on a regular basis throughout the cadence of a deal, or as it were, throughout the cycle of a buyer's journey as they move from education to solution to selection, and then hopefully become an advocate and then a renewal for all of our organizations. Observation is a great way to take in the information that we need about what a rep is doing and to provide coaching feedback and coaching guidance that's using real data that's associated with that particular individual's actual actions. Now, obviously, the days are still not back where a first-line manager can travel to each of their folks' territories and spend 3 days. But guys, you know that all the tools are now available for us to do so, whether it's conversation intelligence, interaction intelligence, lots of tools out there that allow us to do this and to use that data for good and not necessarily for evil. Secondly, dashboard metrics. I'm going to address what a great dashboard looks like for sales coaching in just a couple of minutes time. So don't want to recurse that too much. But we want to make sure that we're looking at the leading indicators, the learning and leading indicators, what we're doing, and associate those appropriately as sales enablement professionals with the lagging indicators that ultimately represent, are we helping our reps be more productive? Are we helping them engage in new and better behaviors that the company wants them to? And then finally, we need to try to find a way to connect what we're doing with what happens. Are the assets that we're using resulting in more or fewer closed deals? Is the training and development that we're delivering resulting in reps who are better or not better at hitting their annual number? Making sure that we create direct links between the things we do with sales enablement and sales leaders and the ultimate outcomes is crucial. One thing that's important to remember, though, is that the way in which sales enablement leaders and sales training leaders are often compensated based on the ultimate lagging indicators, did we make our numbers for the year, are not the same as the way in which they should be motivated and judged and evaluated. We've got a whole bunch of IP out there on measuring sales enablement that sort of goes deeper into that for those folks who might be customers. The third piece of this sort of graphic is the idea of processes and tools. First of all, we want to make sure that there is an appropriate cadence that is created that seems to make sense in terms of volume and frequency so that coaching happens naturally and organically. Let's divorce a coaching discussion or environment, rep and manager, from a pipeline review meeting, rep and manager. A pipeline review meeting is about deals. It's about advancing things along. It's about better customer discovery. It's about smoothing out some of the speed bumps inside our organization to help get those deals across the line. It's also about knowing when to fold them and which deals should not be moved across the line. Some of that environment can involve coaching, but let's divorce in our minds the deal emphasis from the coaching emphasis. Coaching is about the competencies. How are my skills in need of an upgrade? What are the processes that I need to know about better? What are the things that I need to know more about, which might involve returning to some training and learning and readiness assets that will then help me better react in those deal review specific meetings. Technology, we look at two major families in sales enablement. We talk about sales content and we talk about sales readiness as the two major areas. There's a lot of different spins on those terminologies out there, and the world is full of them. But the net is all of us pretty much at this point have invested in the technologies or technology families that we need in order to gain those insights that I mentioned. But these tools are very often not used to their full extent, the way we only use 10% of our brain, according to what folks say. We also want to make sure that we are coaching evenly across the organization. You know, if Mari is my boss and Mark is Jamie's boss, and they have different types of coaching interactions than Mari and I do, for whatever reason, proximity, history, teamwork, whatever it might be, coaching is not scalable. It's not growable throughout the organization. So having a standard rubric, what does a 1 or a 3 or a 5 mean when evaluating how someone opened a meeting, when discussing how someone drove for the larger cross-sell or upsell, and making sure that all your managers and coaches are in fact trained on how to use that coaching rubric the same way. Make sure that we can do that. How to get there? The tools that allow us to create the recordings of and the evaluations of real customer interactions from which we then extract those coaching lessons. Then the final piece is actions. And so we want to be able to look at the activity of sellers, not always as the direct causal relationship with their outcomes, but as a way to look at coaching opportunities. First of all, you don't want to meet with someone for their annual review and say, 16 weeks ago, I heard you say something in front of a customer that just wasn't really the right thing. No, real time, immediate. There are medium and long-term opportunities to coach someone, but you want to make sure that feedback is private when it's negative, public when it's positive, and that it's provided in context as often, which is why having developmental and coaching meetings that are separate from your pipeline review meetings is a best practice. Let's also remember that commitments at the end of any kind of coaching or even a pipeline review discussion, both of us wear responsibility for doing something. Hey, you need to go make more phone calls. Come back to me when your pipeline looks better. That's not coaching, Mark, right? Hey, we just talked about better ways to create, the opportunity to engage the hidden buyers. Tell you what, I'm going to ask you to engage in this particular practice or developmental activity, but I am going to go and find some other resources for you. And I'm going to come back to you within 7 to 10 days with some additional suggestions. And then we're going to get together. We're going to do a practice run. I'll give you real-time feedback. That's owning your coaching environment. And then finally, we want to make sure that the long-term learning, development, and readiness strategy, which can include all of these, hopefully not so sudden product launches, are an opportunity to make sure that we're embedding coaching into the long-term development and the plans for formal and informal training that an organization is deciding to implement. This requires having a sales enablement calendar. Spoiler alert, nothing in the third month of any given quarter, but the coaching, obviously, which is sometimes less formal and takes place just in these one-on-one environments, that's fine, but they need to be in sync with and not deliver contrary messages to what our formal training is part of. So finally, the last piece is this idea of turning all of these insights into real everyday actions that sales managers, overlays, coaches, and leaders can use to provide better coaching. So work with me a little bit, and we're going to go through a bit of a graphic display here. Let's think about, is it possible to create a dashboard? We all love our dashboards for everything, right? Where are my deals? Where are my people? Where's my mortgage rate? Where's my stock portfolio? Whatever the dashboard, where are the Red Sox after tonight's first game in Tampa Bay? Can't let another half hour go by without mentioning the playoffs, Mark. So constructing a sales coaching dashboard begins with understanding, what are all the KPIs? What are all the metrics? What are the numbers that I can collect about my sellers, about what they do, what they say, what they accomplish, what they send, how they interact? Our recommendation is to try to group those into different kinds of categories that kind of start to make common sense for your organization, and then to weight them and bring them together into a final score that says, hey, across all different roles or folks within a role, across different disciplines or SUs or GOs, we are consistently providing a scoring structure that says, here's how strong someone is at their job. And coaching is a part of that. It contributes to how to remedy the folks who have lower scores and how to validate for the folks with higher scores that we're doing it right. So let's break this down in a little bit more detail. We recommend, as an example, that one family of metrics that you look at be the sales performance, which is how much did I sell? What was my percentage rate? What was my batting average? Did I hit my number? Did I achieve the product mix that you guys are asking of me this particular quarter or this particular year? So that's what I did. We also want to think about, how did I get there? What are the actual numbers behind my activities? I've been in sales long enough that I have seen people say, just make more calls and you'll make your number. Just work harder and you'll make your number. Not wrong, but it's a very limited context, right? Volume and quality don't always go hand in hand. But we need to at least access and understand that information if we're going to provide a basis for how to coach someone up. Then finally, we want to look at the learning piece. And I know, Mark, this is where this is the nearest to your heart. We want to look at what's actually getting done from the learning perspective. We all know how demanding and how smart and how independent B2B buyers are now. So if we're not making sure that our sellers are just as smart and just as able to think on their feet, which means that they are knowledgeable and not just parroting out scripts, then we're going to probably have a more likelihood of being stronger. So if we take these kind of KPIs, then we want to show you just a sample for how you can build these out into a coaching dashboard. And you guys can take this and screenshot it and build your own dashboard based on these numbers. We're just taking some guesses here. So first of all, you want to think about the weighting between those three different components that we talked about. We've got the KPIs that are what I did, how I learned, and what I accomplished. And you want to think about what is the attainment that I have accomplished, either internally, have I gone through the learning and development, internally / externally, have I engaged in the number of activities, and then obviously at the end of each selling period, what numbers did I hit? Did I finally accomplish? So as we start to add this in, you can see we're making some just suggestions here for those 4 KPIs that were about the activities that I pursued. These 3 KPIs that were about the results that I accomplished. And these 5 KPIs that were for the learning and development activities. We're just suggesting 20% on the learning, 50% on what I accomplished, and 30% on the activities that I leveraged to get there. You can make up your own. You can balance them any way you want. This is the equivalent of just changing around the values in the spreadsheet, right? It's very basic type of math. But the idea is that if you think you're able to anticipate what the right balance of these categories are, and then within these categories, maybe presentation and product training is more important than business acumen and negotiation skills. Maybe the product mix and quota are certainly important. The win rate, if you hit a lot of singles, but you make your number, that's probably not so bad. And in the category of activities, we decide, let's just weight all of these equally. These are just random sort of guided selections that we've made as suggestions, but you guys can think around with these as much as you want. But you have to be in agreement on these based not just on what's in your head, but by looking at your top performers to figure out what do they do? And that should dictate where these weights are. And then you start to look at the overall score as you fill in the actual attainment at the individual level, or at the team level, or the group level. And how those numbers play out is just simple math. We don't want to oversimplify what it takes to be a great sales leader, to be a great sales enablement leader, to be a great sales coach. But the idea behind this is that if in fact you take the time to create a fact-based, high performer sales rep driven system that says, this is what coaching should be building upon, you'll have some consistency through your organization. So if you're 100 reps, someday you want to be 500 reps. If you're 1,000 reps, someday you want to be 10,000 reps. You can't really scale and automate a coaching culture without having some of these things properly in place. So Mark, back over to you to round up.
Yeah, I mean, what I really think about is use your sales formula. It's like talking to those sales leaders, those ops leaders that are on with us, back in to that closed won deal, that closed loss deal. Create those steps, even if they're educated guesses right now. You have to start somewhere. And that formula can feed into what Peter is talking about and what you're seeing here. The first time Peter showed me his research, my eyes got really big because this is something Ambition has been passionate about for 7 years. The idea of clear expectations to the frontline seller, to the frontline manager, but also giving them these super scores. So what we called an Ambition is an activity score, one single metric made of multiple metrics that tells Jared, in this case, if he had a good day or a bad day based on weighted KPIs. Same goes for an objective score where your quota might live or a certain amount of pipeline in a certain stage. The idea being that, hey, if you hit your activity score every day or every week, you'll hit your quota every month or every quarter. And when you can create that mathematical formula, like Peter was mentioning earlier, now your new seller who's working from home, that doesn't have the manager who's there to cheer them on and be over their shoulder and coach live, well, now they have more of the guidance on what they need to do to have that successful day and successful week. And we couldn't agree more with the research that Forrester has shown here thus far. The last piece here is kind of under the hood of that scorecard. So talking about how you build that. Well, in Ambition, you can set your targets, your weights, pick your metrics, even look at the bell curve of how your team performance would be based on how the scorecard is built. So again, when Peter showed us the performance and activity and certification, Ambition I started thinking, wow, like this really validates a lot of what our customers already believe. All right, so the last thing I wanted to say is this isn't a new concept. While it's really great to have a group like Forrester talking about what's next in creating the sales coaching program, there are a lot of great companies out there who are already building on this coaching, this actionable intelligence down to the front line, this motivation of what the right behaviors look like. So at Ambition, this is a tiny subset of a great client list that we're very proud to support. But while this may seem very new to some of you, no, it's starting to be proven more and more and more regarding the importance of creating that scalable coaching program, and part of that being the right sales dashboard inside of the coaching program.
Thank you so much. Thank you to both of you, both Peter and Mark. What a great session with great insights. Before we get to Q&A, I wanted to just do a couple quick announcements. We will be sending the recording in the coming business days. Along with the video, we will have a few excellent resources, along with an email template you could send your boss if you need to help, really talk about the ROI of sales coaching, and a couple of other free guides. So please keep a watch out for that email. And then finally, at the end of this presentation, we will have a survey pop up in browser, just 3 questions. Would love if you would answer them. Just a couple questions about the challenges you're facing, and we will come out with the results so you guys can definitely glean some insights from your fellow listeners today. So diving into Q&A, I know we have just 9 minutes. A few great ones came in. The first one I'm going to have you both address is a little bit less of a question, so I'll just have you guys kind of speak to it. The listener asked, are you seeing more companies hiring sales performance coaches to help drive faster time to competency and career development? Whoever wants to take that can answer it.
I'll take a first swag at that, Mark. So yeah, I mean, if you guys know anything about pro football teams, the average pro football team, all pro football teams have a limit on how many players they carry. It's either 53 or 58, I think, during the season. But the average NFL team now has about 22, 23 coaches. Why? In the org chart, everybody reports up to the head coach, but all of these people are the uncles and the aunties, right? The equivalents of folks that they don't directly report to, but they represent adult supervision in the room. And of course, they're very skill specific, the linebackers, the special teams, the quarterbacks, et cetera. We are definitely, Mari, seeing a huge increase in this role of the field sales coach. It actually fills a couple of needs of an organization. We know that great individual contributors are often promoted into managers, despite not necessarily having all of the right competencies to be a great manager. Boston baseball reference again, Ted Williams, best hitter of all time. He was on Bleacher Report's list of one of the 10 worst managers of all time. It's a different competency set. Just because you did the job doesn't mean you can supervise and manage the job. So a field sales coach role is a great way for someone to spend 12, 18 months, kind of in between. Learn how to be a manager, learn how to be a coach, provide that institutional knowledge. It's almost always got to be an internal hire. When someone is ready to move up, but you don't necessarily just want to push them upstairs, that's a great opportunity. It's also just sort of a great way to have someone who's a bit of a trusted friend, who's a buddy, who gets you, but also still kind of has one foot now in management. Again, to the point of the skills coaches, just because, Mark is my boss and I and 7 other people report to him, doesn't mean that you, Mari, as an experienced person who knows where the skeletons are buried around the organization, can't be of help to me. And there might be a few questions that I'm a little embarrassed to ask my direct boss, and you're willing to help me out.
Excellent. Moving on to the next question. Mark, I'll have you answer this since you're, you have a team for yourself right now. Somebody asked, I'd love to get some recommendations on affordable courses for development for both leaders and reps. Is there anything you can think of off the top of your head?
Oh yeah, podcasts, they're free. And there's so many good sales podcasts out there. In fact, one of my new hires just asked me a similar question yesterday. So the 3 I would recommend, and I might get the person wrong, but there's one called Sales Success Stories. It's about the top 1% performers in different roles. I'm blanking on the gentleman who hosted, but it's great. Another one is the John Barros. I don't know what his Make It Happen podcast is really strong. And what's the sales enablement with Andy Paul, I think is his name, is another great sales podcast. These are free. they're super actionable. People are really honest in them. As a sales leader, I listen to them too. But I'd check those 3 out. As far as affordable development goes, there's so much out there, but I'd start with podcasts.
Excellent. I know we're getting close to the top of the hour. I'm going to have one more question for you guys, and I think it's a good one. Is there such thing as coaching for coaches?
Coaching for coaches, absolutely. What it really comes down to is what are the skills, knowledge, and process pieces that we want folks to be great at in order to maximize the chances they'll be great at their job. If you're a rep, being great at your job means hitting your number and hopefully generating a nice set of customer satisfaction scores and NPSs and all that type of thing. If you're a first line manager, it's about the number again, but it's a little bit more about the development of your people. If you're a second line manager and so on and so on. So we see organizations in a weird way. I know it's going to sound a little bit weird, but a lot of private sector organizations looking to the public sector. Not that government organizations are the paragons of efficiency or productivity, but they have the human capital management thing down reasonably well. If you're a G3, everybody in the organization knows what it takes to be a G4. Certain time enrolled, certain continuing education credits, certain scores on your performance reviews, and so on and so on. So coaching the coach is it's no different than coaching the rep. It's just over a different mapped set of competencies, Mark.
Yeah, I actually think I can just layer on a little bit more. Coaching the coaches is, when I talk about the frontline manager being forgotten about, that's often where that gap is. The VP, the director is going, oh, well, they were a great rep. They'll figure it out. Just get it out with your team. There's a gap there. Those folks don't have the right tools or process to know what right looks like, unless it's exactly what their right was before. And we all know that you can't just force your process down other people as a top performer. So huge gap there, and you can definitely coach coaches, something you should be doing.
Great answers. Thanks again, everybody. Thank you to all of the listeners today. So much appreciation for all of you guys. If you have questions after this, you know where to find us. Ambition.com. We'll be sure to have Peter answer as well. Watch for all of the follow-up materials here in the coming business days, and take care. Thank you again.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye.